This Day in Sports History. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Christmas will be here before you know it, and you know what would make a great stocking stuffer for everybody in your family? Sterling Soap. From bar soap to shave soap, beard balm to lip balm, aftershaves and lotions, Sterling Soap has something for everyone on your list. Check out their seasonal soaps that will complement the scents of your home this holiday season. And they're more than just soap. They also have a full line of coffee straight from the Sterling Roastery. Find their full line of products at sterlingsoapcompany.com. Hey, you're back. I'm not surprised. There's great stuff here. And this is the one and only daily sports history podcast dedicated to looking back at all the great, wild, weird, and amazing things that happened in sports. It's November 19th, and on this day in 1978, it was the original Miracle at the Meadowlands. Oh, the humanity. For Giants fans, this is such a horrific ending to a game that it causes them to turn away in disgust as if they're watching a slasher film. But what happened in this game is important and led to a change in how the end of a game usually plays out now. So this is the Philadelphia Eagles at the Meadowlands to play the New York Giants. Coming into this one, the Eagles still harbored hopes of a wild card playoff spot. The Giants were 5-6, they'd lost 3 straight, and they were not making any postseason plans. But New York jumped out to the lead and held a 17-6 advantage as they went to the fourth quarter. The Eagles scored a touchdown to narrow that margin to 17-14. Now, you've seen the final play in this game, but I think it's important to go back a few plays to widen the perspective and try to understand why the Giants did what they did. So, under 2 minutes to play, the Eagles had the football at the Giants' 19-yard line. Eagle quarterback Ron Jaworski dropped back to pass, and his throw to fullback Mike Hogan was a little bit high and grazed off Hogan's fingertips. Giant defensive back Otis McKinney was in the right spot at the right time, and he picked it off, ending the Eagles' threat. Now, all the Giants had to do was run out the clock, and they'd win the game. The Giants took over possession with 1 minute, 23 seconds left. On first down, quarterback Joe Pisarcik did not take a knee, but he kind of just fell to the ground, flopped kinda. Eagles linebacker Frank LeMaster busted through the line, bowled over a blocker, and kind of grazed Pisarcik's head as he flew by, and a little shoving match ensued between LeMaster and some Giants. Now, you can kind of understand what LeMaster was thinking. It's down by contact at this point. So, and I only bring this particular detail up to suggest that maybe this is what led to what happened 2 plays later. Okay, so the Eagles take their final timeout, and on second down, Pisarcik did not take a knee or fall to the ground. Instead, he spun and he handed it off to fullback Larry Csonka, who picked up about 9 yards. Now, Eagles with no way to stop the clock, the Giants just have to run one more play and the clock runs out. Everybody in the stadium figured the game to be over. CBS was rolling the closing credits and promoting the world's strongest man competition coming up after the conclusion of the game. On third down, the Giants had the same play called. Pisarcik was to spin, hand the ball to Csonka, and that would be that. Instead, this happened. Here's Don Criqui with the call that day for CBS.
As the clock winds out on the Philadelphia Eagles, a game they thought would project them into a possible wild card position. It would bring them 7-5 had they won, but a late interception by the Giants will preserve a Giant victory. An upset win as the Giants lead 17-12, and we're inside 30 seconds. The Eagles have no timeouts. Wait a minute. Here's a free foot. I don't believe it. The Eagles pick it up, and Herm Edwards runs it in for a touchdown.
Herm Edwards' scoop and score not only gave the Eagles the unbelievable victory, but it was the catalyst to several actions. First, it put the Eagles firmly in the playoff picture. They went 2-2 the rest of the way, which included a win against the Giants in the final week of the regular season. Now, second, the Giants fired their offensive coordinator Bob Gibson the following day, and then they fired head coach John McVay at the end of the season. Giants owner Wellington Mara said change was going to happen, but not as quickly as if the Giants had won this game. Several New York players on the field for this game who stuck around into the 80s said that the coach for the 79 season, Ray Perkins, changed the attitude of the team, and that eventually led to Bill Parcells coming in and leading the Giants to 2 Super Bowl titles in the 80s. Joe Pisarcik was released by the Giants and he wound up in Philly. He was part of the team that went to Super Bowl 15 and played against the Raiders. And lastly, this is what led to teams developing what is now called the victory formation. And like I mentioned, Pisarcik, he kind of collapsed or fell to the ground. Well, it left him exposed to an overzealous defensive lineman or a linebacker. So teams innovated and came up with the tight alignment kneel-down play to run out the clock at the end of the game. It was called the $1 Million Goal. On this day in 1989, Paul Caligiuri scored what may be the most important goal ever scored in U.S. soccer history. The U.S. men's team was blowing it. A monumental opportunity lay before them, and while this was a young team of college kids, the fact that Mexico had been banished from the 1990 World Cup left a void that many expected the U.S. to fill. But a 0-0 tie in their previous game with El Salvador put them in a must-win game in their final World Cup qualifier against Trinidad-Tobago. This match was played in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago just needed a tie to advance to realize their World Cup dreams. And speaking of dreams, Caligiuri had a premonition in the days leading up to this one. He roomed with U.S. goalkeeper Tony Meola during training and travel and said to Tony, "I'm seeing the headline after this game. USA wins 1-0. Meola gets the shutout and Caligiuri scores the goal." Paul just had a feeling that they were going to change U.S. soccer forever on this day. Now, one other thing to consider was that Caligiuri wasn't typically in the starting 11, but he was on this day. His primary role was to play central midfield and to mark and disrupt Trinidad's best setup man. The game was scoreless for the first 29 minutes. In the 30th, this happened. Here's John Paul Della Camera with a call for ESPN that day.
Ramos putting it in to Caligiuri. Beats the first man. A left-footed shot. Paul Caligiuri has scored a goal. The USA lead 1-0.
Caligiuri's left-footed shot off his laces dipped perfectly into the right side of the net to give the U.S. the 1-0 lead. The game progressed into the second half with the sun casting long shadows and glaring into the eyes of Meola in goal. Trinidad applied pressure, but they just could not find the equalizer. When the whistle blew for full time, the U.S. had qualified for the 1990 World Cup, their first appearance in 40 years. But there were other residuals from this game. The U.S. had been awarded to host the 1994 World Cup, but there were concerns about how it was going to be received, especially if the host nation had not played in a World Cup for more than 4 decades. Well, the U.S. win on this day settled a lot of nerves in FIFA, and as it turned out, World Cup 94 was a huge financial success with record crowds. Also because of the World Cup qualification in 1990, thanks to Caligiuri's goal, and the success of the 94 World Cup in the U.S., it eventually led to the establishment of Major League Soccer in 1996. And it really is hard to imagine it coming together as quickly or at all, if not for the goal that Paul Caligiuri scored on this day in 1989. Are you a hockey fan? Then you'll love Eric Zweig's new book, Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2. It's a treasure trove of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave even the most devoted puckhead astounded. The intense rivalries, epic showdowns, and historic clashes that shaped the NHL's early years, it's all in there. Zweig uncovers the true stories that helped shape the sport, ensuring that you will never look at hockey the same way again. Check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. There is not a more important person to soccer globally than Pelé. On this day in 1969, Pelé scored career goal number 1,000. This was a game at one of the palaces built for soccer, Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro. Pelé's Santos team was playing Vasco da Gama. Pelé had scored number 999 2 games earlier. In the next game, Santos played on the road, and Pelé had a few chances in that game, but one shot hit the crossbar and another was saved off the line by a defender. That resulted in boos from the home crowd at their own player for denying them the chance to see the historic 1,000th goal. The Vasco da Gama team was also not in the mood to be the team that allowed history to be made. A cross into the box in this one, intended for Pelé, was intentionally headed into the goal by a Vasco da Gama defender for an own goal. He'd rather do that than let Pelé score his 1,000th. With time winding down in the match, Pelé broke away with the ball at his feet. Before he could rip a shot, he was brought down in the box, giving him a penalty kick. As cool as he always seemed to be, he slotted a low ball into the right side of the net. The crowd stormed the pitch immediately, and he was hoisted onto the shoulders of the Santos fans and carried off the field. And on this day in 1995, the Baltimore Stallions became the first and only U.S.-based team to win the Canadian Football League's Grey Cup. The Canadian Football League made a brief foray south of the border, starting in 1993 with a team in Sacramento, California. The Baltimore Stallions came along in the 1994 season, along with two other teams. For a team that would only spend 2 seasons in existence, they had great success. In their inaugural season, they made it all the way to the Grey Cup, which, for the uninitiated, the Grey Cup is the CFL version of the Super Bowl. They came up 3 points shy in the 94 edition. Well, after a stellar 15-3 regular season that included a 10-game winning streak, the Stallions found their way back to the Grey Cup in 95 against the Calgary Stampeders. Baltimore returned 2 punts for touchdowns, had a defensive scoop and score, 5 field goals, and quarterback Tracy Ham threw for 213 yards and scored a rushing TD to beat Doug Flutie and the Stampeders 37-20. It was the first and only time an American team won the Grey Cup, and that's largely due to what happened in the week before the Grey Cup. If you remember the story from the 6th, when Browns owner Art Modell announced he was moving his team to Baltimore beginning play in 1996, well, Stallions owner Jim Spiros knew he was not going to be able to compete with the NFL in his backyard, so he folded the team after the Grey Cup win and moved to Montreal to become the Montreal Alouettes. The rest of the American-based CFL teams also folded, and that was the end of the short 3-year experiment of the Canadian Football League in the U.S. Time now for today's, wait, what? Surprising fact of the day. Frank Sinatra is credited with creating the concept album. The 1955 release of In the Wee Small Hours developed the idea of a set of songs unified by a theme. In this case, songs about melancholy. That's all I've got for you today. Be sure to come on back tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.